amazing uh, how the need there is for those gates all over the country.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
guess I didn't realize that, and then I realized that there are ranches and farms all over the place.
Big farms out west.
Sam Thorner, how we doing on a quorum?
We have a quorum. We're waiting on a couple more folks that we've heard from that are coming.
Okay.
One or two people who may not be here, but we have a quorum, so we can go ahead and get started whenever you're ready.
Well, why don't we give them a minute or two if we got a couple more? It's not quite time anyway, is it? Right at 2 o'clock?
It's just now 2 o'clock.
Well, we'll give them a couple more minutes, see if they can
Okay.
get on here.
Looks like we're just missing two people, Secretary Johnson, and Marilyn Mason.
Okay. Well, let's get started and they can join us if they get on, okay?
That sounds good.
All right, so I'm going to call this meeting to order. I want to thank you all for attending virtually of this meeting, the Kentucky Housing Corporation Board of Directors meeting, April 24th, 2025. So, Sam, can you confirm a quorum and also confirm the press notice?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have a quorum and the press has been notified.
Okay, thank you. So, Sam, I'm going to turn it over to you to swear in the new private board member.
Thank you. So, as you all know, we've had some new members, and Mayor Adams, who's on the call today, needs to be sworn in as a first-time new private board member. I did confirm that we are allowed to swear in virtually. So, Laura Hurst, who is the board liaison and is also a public notary, is going to swear in Mayor Adams at this time.
Okay. Hi, Mayor Adams. How are you?
Doing fine. How are you all doing?
Good. So if you'll just raise your right hand and I guess at the end just say I do. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this Commonwealth, and be faithful and true to the Commonwealth of Kentucky so long as I continue a citizen thereof, and that I will faithfully execute to the best of my ability the office of board member of Kentucky Housing Corporation according to law. And I do further solemnly swear or affirm that since the adoption of the present Constitution, I, being a citizen of this state, have not fought a duel with deadly weapons within this state nor out of it, nor have I sent or accepted a challenge to fight a duel with deadly weapons, nor have I acted as second in carrying a challenge, nor aided or assisted any person thus offending. So help me God.
I do.
Well, welcome, Mayor Adams. We're glad to have you on board.
Thank
So,
you. I'm glad to be here. I'm excited about the opportunity.
Well, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to stop us. So, and Ms. Hurst, thank you. That was well done. We appreciate you. Okay, so we'll move on to consideration and approval of the minutes. I think everybody's had an opportunity to look over the minutes that Sam sent out. Are there any questions or additions or corrections to the minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion that they be approved.
So moved.
All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, like sign, motion carries. Okay, Sam, you want to give the report of the executive committee from March 27th?
Yes. So the executive committee of the board met virtually on March 27th, 2025. Committee approved a final resolution for the issuance of $38.4 million in tax-exempt bonds for the Cedar Grove Commons project. This project is located in Louisville on Oral Road and consists of 322 total units. No other matters were considered by the executive committee.
Okay. Any members have any questions of Sam about the executive committee? Okay, we'll move right along then. With the authorization to renew personal service contract with various real estate agencies. Tracy, are you online there?
I am. Good afternoon,
Good afternoon.
Chair, members of the board. I've got two agenda items here for you, some contracts. Starting with this one, the authorization to renew personal service contracts with various real estate agencies and/or brokers to provide marketing and disposition services. This is for our REO portfolio. Kentucky Housing Corporation requests approval to renew personal service contracts for various agencies and/or brokers to provide as-needed real estate services for the marketing and disposition of KHC's real estate-owned single-family housing portfolio for fiscal year 2026. Following a request for proposals in 2023, KHC selected various real estate agencies and/or brokers, which there's a list attached to this agenda item, to provide marketing and disposition services for the REO portfolio. We have the option of renewing the contract for 2 consecutive years following the initial term. This would be the second renewal. We are recommending approval by the board to authorize the corporation to enter into these contracts in an amount not to exceed $400,000 for fiscal year 26.
Okay, do any members have any questions of Tracy?
Just, you're going to be looking over the next year because you do have to rebid it.
Yeah.
And just making sure that we are, and you have been, as inclusive as possible by sex and national origin and race as we can do.
Yes, certainly. And we contracted with everyone that responded with a full application for each of these years. And most of these properties are rural housing in rural areas because we can't convey properties back to RD like we can some of the other agencies. But we certainly will continue to advertise everywhere and anywhere.
Tracy, this is Denise Durbin here at the Attorney General's office. Probably something I should know. Is there, I know it's been renewed once. Is there a limit to how many times it can be renewed?
So this is the second renewal. Next year, we will have to RFP for these services all over again. Yeah.
Okay, Tracy, thank you very much. Tracy, just let me ask, how many houses would KHC have in its inventory that need disposition at this point?
It's generally a pretty low number. We had 16 last year, 25 in 2023, and 11 in 2022. I think we have definitely less than 12 or so currently. It's our intent not to own real estate. So we definitely convey these to HUD whenever we can.
Well, that's a very low number with the amount of real estate you all deal with. So, okay. Any additional questions of Tracy? If not, I'll entertain a motion that we approve this personal service contract. Please.
So moved.
Okay, I have a motion. I have a second.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Okay, so Tracy, you got another personal service contract with Kane Mitter?
Yes, so this is a request for authorization to enter into a personal service contract with Kane Mitter and Associates for quantitative consulting services. KHC requires the services of a quantitative consulting firm for a handful of things. First, bond structure and analysis. So they help prepare structure and analytical information for each of our bond issuances. They prepare annual and rating agency cash flows, calculate bond yields, measure compliance with federal tax code. They also provide mortgage and investment portfolio participation. They track our allocations of total assets and revenues to individual bond series and also do blends. They provide a flow of funds compliance and cash flow projections. So these guys are pretty vital to what we do, especially with our bond issuances and our bond indentures. Following a request for proposal in February of 2025, 2 responses were received by the corporation, and Kane Mitter was selected by KHC staff to provide the quantitative consulting services. We'll have the option to renew the contract for 2 consecutive years following this initial term of the contract. KHC recommends approval by the Board of Directors of a resolution authorizing us to enter into a personal service contract with Kane Mitter and Associates for fiscal year 2026, an amount not to exceed $650,000.
Any members have any questions of Tracy in regard to this personal service contract? If not, I'll entertain a motion that it be approved.
It's Bill, I'll make the motion.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Tracy, thank you very much. And I understand you may be coming to Maysville pretty soon.
Yes, I
Okay.
believe so.
All
We'll
right.
see
We look
you
forward
in
to seeing.
June.
Okay. All right. Kevin Field, we got a personal service contract with Regulatory Solutions. You want to
Yes,
tell us about that?
yes, sir. Thank you for considering this resolution. I apologize. I seem to be experiencing problems with my laptop camera today, but hopefully you can hear me okay.
We can hear you fine, Kevin. Just
Great.
can't see you.
Great. So this is a consideration for authorization to renew a personal service contract with Regulatory Solutions for quality control review services. KHC requires these services to perform quality control reviews in accordance with FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the VA, and RHS to meet their requirements for the single-family mortgage servicing and the servicing departments. So following a request for proposal this past February, Regulatory Solutions was selected by a review committee to provide quality control review services. KHC has the option of renewing these services for 2 consecutive years following this initial contract. So KHC recommends or requests approval by the board of a resolution authorizing the corporation to renew a personal service contract with Regulatory Solutions for these quality control review services for fiscal year 2026 in an amount not to exceed $165,000.
Okay, do any members have any questions for Kevin in regard to this personal service contract? If not, I will entertain a motion that we approve. Someone?
I'll make the motion.
So moved.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Kevin. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
your hard work.
Thank you.
Okay, Lauren Van Sickle, we got a personal service contract with Cloudburst Consulting Group.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. KHC is requiring consulting and preparation services for the 2025-2029 consolidated plan for the Commonwealth of Kentucky and the analysis of impediments to fair housing. Following a request for proposals process in 2024, KHC selected and the executive committee authorized personal service contract with Cloudburst Consulting Group. The term of this contract is to expire on June 30th, 2025, and there is an option to renew this contract for 2 consecutive years. At this time, for KHC to properly promulgate the 2025 to 2029 consolidated plan and analysis of impediments to fair housing, we need to input information to be provided by HUD related to this planning process. At this time, HUD has not provided this necessary information, and therefore it's unlikely that we'll be able to complete this preparation by the end of this fiscal year before this contract would expire on June 30th, 2025. We are asking for approval of an amendment to extend the personal service contract end date through the end of this calendar year, making it necessary to accommodate the delay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
it's Bill. I've got a general question. I apologize.
Go right ahead.
When we're looking at these public service, personal service contracts, and obviously when they're up for a renewal, I can understand it. But so like when this contract would have been originally granted, and this is a general question, not just specific to this one, but like would Cloudburst have been the same firm we would have been using before the 2024-25 contract? Or would we have been?
I can answer that for you. Not necessarily. Whenever we are procuring personal services for a personal service contract, when it is initially brought to the board, we always initiate a request for proposals, and we will evaluate those that are providing bids to KHC and score them accordingly. Sometimes that is with vendors that we have worked with previously or may already be contracting with. And sometimes that is new vendors. It really just depends upon the specific contract. In this particular instance, this was a new RFP that we did in 2024. And this one in particular is just an amendment to extend out the date.
Okay. Thank you. So there is would you call it a scoring process that you
Yes.
go to compare the RFPs, which makes sense. Okay. All righty. Thank you. Just more of an administrative question, Mr. Chairman. So
Thank you, Mr. Jones. That's a good question. So,
Um,
and Lauren,
I-
thank you for your explanation. Any other questions?
Yeah, Lauren, I just want to let you know that the part that can be done for the Louisville AI has been done. So maybe you can get a sneak preview because everybody's facing this. So, but just for you to have some kind of, guide or information about Louisville. I realize that's not your catchment area, but still.
I appreciate it. We have begun work. We are practically finished thus far with what we can for the consolidated plan and analysis of impediments. We're just waiting for this information to be put in before we can actually complete this.
Can I move that we give this extension to December 31st?
Okay, so we have a motion. Do I have a second?
second.
All right, have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Lauren. We appreciate your hard work.
Thank you.
Okay, Curtis Stauffer. We've got a personal service contract with Corporation for Supportive Housing. You want to tell us about that?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. While we're scrolling down there, just allow me to preface this ask by saying I've never been more excited to present a contract amendment to the Board of Directors. This is the result of a recent significant policy win for the Commonwealth. For many years, advocates and staff in the Department for Medicaid Services have been working to find a way to ensure that Medicaid can provide tenancy supportive services for folks with co-occurring substance use disorders and severe mental illness. It's a key component of successful permanent supportive housing projects. And we learned in mid-April that the Center for Medicaid Services in DC had authorized Kentucky to get a 1915 I amendment to provide those Medicaid services. This is a huge win, and the Department for Medicaid Services is accelerating their timeline for implementation. And we've been working very closely with this vendor on a number of supports and training related to permanent supportive housing. And we're going to need to expedite the work related to Medicaid services that was initially planned for a new contract in fiscal year 26 because of the more expedited timeline the Commonwealth is pursuing for implementation of this new benefit. So this is a really groundbreaking resource that will help support folks who are experiencing homelessness and are getting rehoused across the Commonwealth. So with that, we're seeking authorization to amend a personal services contract with the Corporation for Supportive Housing, or CSH, for homeless services, training, and technical assistance. We request authorization to amend the current personal service contract with CSH that's in effect through June 30th of 2025 to provide a range of services related to homelessness, services, training, and technical assistance. And this amendment will specifically allocate additional home ARP administrative funding to CSH to provide what's called Medicaid Systems Alignment, technical assistance to the Department for Medicaid Services, Department for Behavioral Health, Development and Intellectual Disabilities, Kentucky's 3 continuums of care, and local homeless service providers. And what this will do is ensure that Medicaid and the homeless services world are speaking the same language and using the same terms so that it'll be fewer barriers for our homeless service providers who are very unfamiliar with this world to become Medicaid billers and work within those systems, and to ensure that our folks in the administrative side of Medicaid are not putting up barriers to their use by our partners. Second, what CSH plans to provide early in fiscal year 26 is a Medicaid Academy to teach our homeless service providers how to use this new benefit, how to become Medicaid billers, and become proficient in the Medicaid world. And in order to do that, they need to dive right into the design of this training to ensure that it aligns specifically with the new benefit as Kentucky is designing it. So this will require consultation with the Department for Medicaid Services, as well as outreach to various stakeholders in the continuums of care across the state while they design this. So this will enable our partners to utilize this new benefit once implemented. Additionally, they continue to provide regular technical assistance to graduates of the Kentucky Permanent Supportive Housing Institute, who are all in the midst of building new permanent supportive housing developments around the Commonwealth. And they provide key assistance to them as they go through financing, closing for development, construction, completion of construction, initial lease up, hiring, policies and procedures, et cetera. And we're excited that they remain very busy assisting these very important projects across the state. We are continuing to work with CSH and have for a number of years because they are widely recognized not only as the nation's leading expert on permanent supportive housing, but also in the use of Medicaid for tenancy support services. They have assisted multiple states in designing and implementing their tenancy support programs through Medicaid, including Arizona, California, the District of Columbia, and Minnesota, just to name a few. And they will ensure that we can implement this new 1959 state plan amendment that will allow Medicaid reimbursement for pre-tenancy, so that will help with housing search and placement, as well as tenancy sustaining supports for persons 18 years or older who possess a primary diagnosis of serious mental illness or co-occurring SMI and substance use disorder. And as mentioned, this will have a profound impact on the ability of our partners to provide supportive services to folks in permanent supportive housing across the Commonwealth. As DMS intends to launch enrollment for this benefit for providers at July 1st, we need to rush to get this Medicaid Academy and systems alignment work completed. Therefore, we are requesting authorization to increase their current award by $40,000. To give you some background on how we initially procured CSH, we did request for proposals in 2021 for consultants to assist with the implementation of COVID-era relief dollars targeted towards homeless services, including the Home American Rescue Plan Act program, as well as other coronavirus relief funds. And we've successfully worked with CSH for a number of years now and have received board approval to do multiple extensions and renewals on this contract for 2 consecutive years as permitted by the initial contract. And then last year, the board authorized an additional year of renewal, which governs our current contract, which we seek to amend. And this was done because CSH, as I mentioned, is very uniquely positioned in the policy world as a sole source vendor because no other vendors are able to perform the scope of work as proposed. And we are building on years of work that's already occurred, and this funding will ensure that that important work will continue. And the vendor has done reasonable pricing, especially considering the level of expertise and direct involvement they provided. So KHC staff recommends approval by the board of directors of KHC, authorizing KHC to amend the personal services contract with the Corporation for Supportive Housing to provide an additional $40,000 in funding for training and technical assistance related to KHC's homeless services. So the contractual amount is not to exceed $140,000 through June 30th, 2025. And thank you for your consideration of this request.
If I may, I would just like to add, we've been working with the Department for Medicaid Services for years, along with CSH. And we did a big data matching project about 1.5 years ago. And we did find that many people who are homeless in our homeless database have been getting enrolled in Medicaid, which is a good first start. That we were kind of pleasantly surprised by the levels of that and want that to continue. This now will then let our homeless organizations be able to be paid for services they provide to get those folks, to keep those folks housed, to get them housed. And it's really hard to get services dollars. So it could be just a really important new stream of support for services that get homeless people housed and keep them housed.
And I will add one more point. We have funded several permanent supported housing developments utilizing our Home American Rescue Plan Act dollars. And all of these developments have planned for the implementation of this benefit. So ensuring this works well will be key to the success of significant investments the corporation has made in these new permanent supportive housing developments. I want to add that point as well.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you, Curtis. I know you all have worked on this, and you all deserve a lot of credit for getting this done. We really appreciate it. So, do any members have any questions of Curtis in regard to this personal service contract? Or any comments?
Thanks for the thorough presentation of it. The background really is really beneficial. Thanks, Curtis and Wendy. Appreciate it.
So if there are no other questions, I'll entertain a motion that we approve this personal service contract.
So moved.
Okay, have a motion, Mr. Jones. Do I have a second?
A second.
Okay, we have a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Thank you all once again. I think this will make a real difference. So we appreciate your effort.
Thank you for your support.
Just let me say before we go further that, especially for the new members, you will find that Kentucky Housing Corporation has a crackerjack staff, and they are committed to making sure that housing across Kentucky is available to people no matter what their station in life is. And one of the things I've always appreciated, they work very hard to make sure everybody has the opportunity to live in a home. And so certainly where I come from, that's much appreciated. Okay, so with that, Shay, I think you want to talk about Kentucky homelessness and the continuum of care.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shay Raybold with Kentucky Housing Corporation. I work in the Housing Contract Administration with Curtis as our Managing Director. And one of my roles is to help with the annual point in time count, PIT count, or otherwise known as the K count for the balance of state continuum of care. I made a similar presentation to you all about this time last year. So those of you all who are on the board may remember some of this, but I'm going to just kind of remind folks what the point in time count is. Each year, continuums of care across the country, and there's 400 of those, are required to conduct a count of people who are experiencing homelessness in their communities. And that count is to be held over one night during the last 10 days of January. And we typically hold ours the last Wednesday of January. And continuums of care are responsible for organizing the counts. And in Kentucky, there are 3 COCs, the Lexington COC, the Louisville COC, and the Kentucky Balance of State COC, which is the 118 counties outside of Jefferson and Fayette. And the Balance of State COC is overseen by KHC. Next slide, please. So the point in time count is a snapshot. It's not meant to be capturing everyone experiencing homelessness, though we try very hard, but it's to allow us to understand on any given night how many people are experiencing a specific subset of homelessness, which is called literal homelessness. And literal homelessness in this context, we're talking about people who are sleeping in emergency shelters, transitional housing programs that are specifically for people experiencing homelessness. That means being homeless is part of the eligibility criteria, or people who are sleeping outside in other places not meant for regular human habitation, and we refer to those folks as unsheltered. So I do want to make 2 points, some caveats for the data that I'm going to share with you guys today. First of all, we typically submit our point in time count data to HUD at the end of April. However, HUD is moving a little bit slower than normal at the moment, and they have not opened up the system yet for us to submit. So everything that I'm presenting here today is still in draft form, meaning we're still evaluating the data to make sure there's no duplicates or errors that are unforeseen. And so the data might change just slightly by the time we submit it to HUD, but not substantially. And then the other thing that is important for everyone to know here is the data that I'm going to show you is largely going to be for the balance of state continuum of care in terms of totals. And when I go through each slide, I'll make sure to explain what we're looking at. But the reason why is Lexington and Louisville were not able to provide the data for those in shelters for their point in time count in time for today's presentation. They did provide me with the unsheltered data, so I do have that. But just know that, unfortunately, I don't have the totals for Lexington and Louisville for their full count, but I can make that available once it is ready in about a month or so. So next slide. The first information I'm going to share with you, this is for the balance of state COC. And the far right column represents our total for January 29th, 2025, 3,069 people, compared to about 2,600 the prior year. And that is an increase of 391 people, or about a 15% increase, which is almost a similar increase from the 23 to 24 year. I do want to point out the odd column out, 2021, you can see is quite low, and that is because of COVID. In 2021, the balance of state COC did not conduct an unsheltered count. So the number there is just sheltered. And during that time, people were social distancing. Some shelters had closed entirely. So 2021 is kind of a year not to think a whole lot about necessarily. And also 2020, that count occurred in January. All of these counts were in January. So it was prior to the world shutting down due to the pandemic. So I did want to share all these years just so you can kind of see a pre-pandemic year of 2020, if you will, all the way through 2025. Next slide, please.
Shay, just let me ask you a question before you leave
Yes,
that
sir.
slide. So let me be sure about this. 2025, the 3,069, That does not have Lexington or Louisville in it?
That is correct. This slide here is just for counties that reported data from the 118 counties outside of Fayette and Jefferson.
So when you get Lexington and Louisville's count, it's going to be much higher than 15%, right? Increase?
I don't know if it's going to be much higher. Last year's total number was around, I can't remember exactly, it was around 5,000 plus.
Okay.
So I know, in fact, these next slides, I am going to have a little bit of Lexington data. I do know the numbers are going to be higher total for all 120 counties year over year. I just can't say if it's going to be more than 15%.
Okay.
And I have a question. The balance of state is 118 counties reporting to you. Did every county report?
Excellent question. The answer is no. I can tell you that we do have folks in nearly all counties trying to find people who are unsheltered. And this year we had, of the 118 counties, there were 72 counties that reported finding people unsheltered compared to 60 last year. So we did have an increase. And then when you add in shelters, it's about 80 of the 118 counties that report. But the counties that aren't reporting are very small, like very small. Not that they don't have people who are experiencing homelessness, but if you look at who they are, they're typically 10,000 population or less.
And
but 10,000 people or less, but their median income may be some of the lowest in the state, or no, these are all very prosperous small counties.
A combination of both, actually, I would say.
Shay, if I could add, I think it's worth noting, please don't take this count to be a factual representation of all homeless people in Kentucky, right? What we do is on one night, we try to do a count of people who are experiencing homelessness, like on the streets and people in shelters. What is representative and is accurate is the trend, but the exact numbers probably miss, particularly in rural communities, a lot of folks. But the trend is what is accurate and is worrisome in our view and is worth paying attention to.
Sorry, I didn't mean to impugn the numbers, but
no, of course
emphasize that there's a lot more need than we are even aware of.
Shay.
Yes, sir.
I know you all live in this world every day, but this is obviously very sobering. A question of definition. I'm understanding that, and maybe you'll touch on it later in the presentation, the population of individuals under the age of 18 that are homeless. And I understand a lot of those individuals go from couch to couch with friends. Would that be considered in a PIT count, or are those just not caught in the data?
So that's a wonderful question. I do have a slide with an age distribution soon, but I don't distinguish on whether or not they're on their own or not. But to answer your question about people who are, the term is couch surfing, one of the terms. And people who are couch surfing, so staying with a friend or family or whatever it might be, but it's not their permanent home, for purposes of the point in time count, both in Kentucky, but based on HUD guidance nationally, they are not included because it might not be an ideal housing situation for them, obviously, but on that night, they have a place to stay, as opposed to sleeping outside or needing to go to an emergency shelter. And so the short answer is they're not included. A good place to find data on minors, people who are under 18 who are in that situation, the Department of Education, Kentucky Department of Education, and then they have been at least reporting to the U.S. Department of Education. They capture that data. However, theirs is over an entire year and not just one point in time.
Yeah. And I appreciate the thank you. That's helpful. And to Wendy's point, the trend is representative, but my guess would be, correct me if I'm wrong, my guess would be these numbers would probably be grossly understated. Is that my understanding correctly?
In terms of people who are experiencing literal homeless, so sleeping out on the street or in shelters, transitional housing, it's definitely an undercount, more so on the unsheltered than the sheltered, because the shelters, more or less, almost all of them participate.
Right.
Where I think what the point in time count does not do and never has done is to be able to capture those that are in the precariously housed situation, whether, regardless of age, but people who are couch surfing or have an eviction notice, or even people staying in hospitals but have no place to go afterwards. So there is a huge group of people that need housing support of some sort that are not captured in this point in time count.
And you may be getting to this in your presentation. I'm just curious, how would Kentucky compare to the states around us?
For the point in time, the actual numbers, I don't have those other states in front of me, but I would say we are, just off the top of my head, similar in our trend. The trends mirror the national trends, whether we're talking about California or Ohio. It doesn't matter where you are, the numbers more or less, give or take a few exceptions, are trending upwards, unfortunately.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions, please.
Go right ahead.
Do you think in rural Kentucky there are shelters that you're not checking because you don't even know they're there?
So I'll say that we rely on partners across the state, like community action agencies, others that serve an entire area development district, if you will. And so if there are those small shelters we're not familiar with, we have a lot of partners that go out and help them participate in the count, like they volunteer to do that. So I think we're capturing most, but I am certain that there are probably some that we don't know about. And every year that tends to happen, where after the point in time count, someone will call up and say, hey, there was this church that started a shelter and we just found out about them. And they said they had people there on January 29th. And so, which was the date we did. And so we'll say, well, how many people did you have? And then we try to get all the information we can and we add them. So we try our best, but yes, sir, there are probably shelters that we don't know about that are not included. But not a huge, I would say that's a small handful.
And the second question is, when you talk about homelessness in general, if there was housing available, how many do you think, say, of that 3,069 choose to be homeless?
Well, I'll say that 3,069 also includes children. So they're probably not choosing. It's not an enormous number, but it's a couple hundred at least. I've got a slide. I can't remember which ones.
Okay.
I would
And-
say I don't have any empirical data to be able to answer that question specifically. But I would say not a large percentage would choose to be homeless.
Well, that makes
I
me
know
feel
there's
better.
an assumption, but I don't think that necessarily would pan out.
If I could
Right.
offer, one of the things, Mayor Adams, that we talk a lot about with our homelessness partners and amongst our homeless team is the idea that if we can make homelessness brief and non-recurring, we have seen an increase in people who are working and homeless and are first-time homeless. Those are often indicators of market failure, right? If you're entering homelessness for the first time versus some folks who are chronically homeless enter and exit homelessness many times over, years. And one of our goals is if we can rapidly rehouse people, meaning keeping their homelessness very short in duration, it is more likely to keep them linked to their job, to their families and their kids, to keep their car, to kind of keep all the pieces together so that chronic homelessness doesn't become part of their experience.
Perfect.
And I'm sure Curtis could speak to this, but having the appropriate housing, like permanent supportive housing, has made many people who cannot endure a shelter have permanent housing because they get the services they need. That's why there's a big push. Shelters are, the story of the babies in the river. Yeah, you want to save them, but you want to go up and get the person who's throwing them in the river. Permanent supportive housing prevents homelessness from people who would not do well in shelter, for instance. So it's part of it's a response, and also vacancy rate. The vacancy rate in Louisville is very tight, and that is an indicator of whether people will experience, I'm sorry, I had some surgery, experience some more homelessness in a city. As the vacancy rate diminishes, then people who could afford more are now, the cost of housing goes up, and that throws people into being homeless as well. Just letting you know.
Thank you for the explanation there. That's good information.
Go right ahead, Shay.
Okay, next slide. Okay, now on this slide, I do have some Lexington and Louisville data. This is the number of people in emergency shelters year over year by COC. You'll see Lexington and Louisville, the 25 data is pending, but I did want to give you some perspective of what their shelter numbers typically look like. But the far right is the balance of state COC. And you can see we did have an increase in those in emergency shelter year over year of about 12%. And Lexington, I heard from them today, they do anticipate an increase in their shelter number year over year, but they still didn't have the number yet. Okay, next slide. So this is transitional housing, which is a little bit different than emergency shelter. It's more, they typically is more of a program limited to 24 months. We don't have many transitional housing programs in the state left anymore. Again, for Lexington and Louisville, their numbers are pending, but I wanted to give you perspective of what their numbers have looked like. And for balance of state, ours actually went down from last year. But it's more similar to where it had been. And then the next slide, I think you'll be most interested in. This is our unsheltered numbers year over year, all three COCs reporting data. And I do just want to point out again that in 2021, Lexington and the balance of state did not do an unsheltered count, which is why there's zeros there. Louisville did, which is why they have numbers. But starting on the left, Lexington had a slight decrease, but still almost double what they had in 2023. In the middle is Louisville. They have had a bit of an increase, though not as much as they had in between 22 and 23. And then the balance of state, unfortunately, we have had an increase of 258 people, or almost 25%, and year over year. This is where the largest increase occurred for our total increase that I presented on that first slide. I have not had a chance to do a very deep dive looking at each county's data. I did mention a little while ago that we did have about 12 more counties reporting unsheltered folks than the previous year. And I looked to see if there were any counties in particular, just very quickly, that were standing out as having really big increases. And it's truly across the state, from Western Kentucky to Eastern Kentucky, and even up in Mason County, Mr. Chairman, a increase up in the Maysville area as well. So I will do more of an analysis in the coming weeks, but it is kind of across the board. And this mirrors a trend, as I mentioned earlier, nationally, of an increase in unsheltered homelessness. I have a few more slides, and I'm sure there may be more questions, but I also know there's more on the agenda. So stop me at any point if you need to.
Right ahead, Shay. And
Okay.
I would second what you're saying about Mason County. We don't have very many, but it has increased.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So this is the age distribution, and this is for balance of state only. And these are folks, whether they were unsheltered or in shelter or transitional housing. The good news is all of those that were under 18 were in emergency shelter or transitional housing. At least in terms of those we found. I'm not trying to say that there's no children unsheltered out there on any given night, but we didn't find any this year. And then you can see there's kind of a bell curve. And this is very similar to the age distribution from last year. We've only been collecting, we being HUD and the COCs, this age distribution for 3 years now. Before, it used to just be under 18, 18 to 24, and over 20 or 25 and over. So now we have more information where we can see the aging population and how much that's growing year over year. Next slide, please. So in terms of household breakdown, the way we define them is households with children, which would be an adult 18 or older with a child in their care. Households without children, which could be one person or more than one person over 18. And then households with only children, which would be those 17 and under. So you can see the vast majority of the 3,000 or so folks I reported on that first slide reported being in households without children. And most of them were individuals, or some had a partner with them. But the reason why this is really important to understand household breakdown is because of understanding the range of housing options that are needed and shelter options that are needed. We obviously need housing for families with children. I know that's a big issue in Louisville in particular, but in the balance of state, we need shelters that will accept individuals as well, and not just women and children. And then for housing, you all know, it is better than I do, many of you, very difficult to build one-bedroom units. But we have a large population, that they're individuals needing that type of option. So it's just important to understand the breakdown. And then I think I have one more slide. Now, this has a lot of numbers on it, so I apologize. I'll explain. If you can look line by line, these are special populations, and the bolded numbers are 25, and it represents the percentage of the total. And then I left 24 in here so you could see how it compares. But this may go back to Mayor Adams' question a little bit in terms of people who are chronically homeless. So these are folks who have been homeless for a year or more or multiple times over the several years, and they have a disability. In 2025, 481 people met that criteria. That is an increase over last year, but it's a similar percentage. And our percentage of chronic homelessness, so these are folks that might be people you're more used to stereotypically thinking of homeless, thinking, or the people that you might see often sleeping under the overpass or whatever it might be with all their belongings, and they're there time and time again. So what we have found is year over year, the percentage that are meeting that chronic homeless definition ranges from 13% to this year 16%. So it is increasing. We are finding people are staying homeless longer, but the problem is that the entire number of people experiencing homelessness is growing at the same time, where people are becoming homeless for the first time. And many of them are reporting it's because of lack of affordable housing, not having enough money to afford the housing that may be available, et cetera. But I just want to point that out because it's really important to understand that a lot of folks that are experiencing homelessness aren't necessarily in need. Some are, absolutely, but aren't necessarily in need of the same level of services as other people. And so the serious mental illness, the substance use, you can see those are about 18 and 16% of the overall population. And this is self-reported, of course. We ask people if they have a certain disabilities and if they have a substance use disorder. Folks fleeing domestic violence makes up, this year, the number went up slightly, but it's about 12%. Most of those are being served by our victim service provider partners across the state, but not all. And then the good news is the veterans number, self-reported, if they are a veteran, continues to go down. Still too many, of course, but that is good news. And that's partly the result of investments by both HUD and the VA in permanent housing for veterans. I do have one more slide that I had a similar one last year, just for context of kind of what kind of programs we have to address homelessness. And in terms of KHC, we have the Continuum of Care program with annual funding. The FY24 amount is around $20 million. And those grants actually start this year in 2025. Even though it's FY24, because it can be a little confusing. And those grants are only for projects in the balance of state. Lexington and Louisville have their own allocations. We did get, through the continuing resolution that was passed by Congress, they kept the funds level for FY25, which would be grants starting in 2026. And while that sounds good, everyone needs to be aware that typically the grants and most of these funds are used for rental assistance for people who are experiencing homelessness to become housed and then to sustain them for a period of time. And the FY25 funding typically would have increased to at least cover increases in fair market rents. But because the funding is level, if there are increases, which there most likely will be, that ultimately means we're going to be able to serve less people than we are this year. So while it's good that there wasn't a cut per se, it's not necessarily great news. We do have some one-time special funding that has a 3-year grant term that has allowed us to expand permanent supportive housing and street outreach, which has been really helpful, particularly in the rural areas. We're hoping that will be renewed, but who knows? It would be part of the FY26 federal budget. And then the Emergency Solutions Grant, this is the funding, the only funding in the state, and it's federal, that can be used for emergency shelters. And we can only use up to 60% of the 2.9 for emergency shelter, which ends up not being a lot when you try to spread it across 118 counties. And the funding is level for FY25. And just for some perspective, since FY 2015 of the federal budget, we have only had about a $250,000 increase in 10 years. So it's not a lot of money. And then our American Rescue Plan money, Home ARP, will continue for a little while longer. The emergency rental assistance, which was enormously important for helping us move people out of homelessness into housing, will come to an end in September, unfortunately. And then we partner with our tenant assistance program at KHC, and they have been great to work with. We had emergency housing vouchers, which were part of COVID allocations, and folks that are still housed with those vouchers can continue to stay there. But once they roll off, they're not renewable. So we're losing those through attrition. And then there's some mainstream vouchers and stability vouchers, but not a lot. But all of that is to say, just one more thing is most of what we spend our money on at KHC is providing housing assistance through rental assistance, which helps move people out of homelessness and try to keep people out of homelessness. But there's not much money in the homeless programs to try to keep people out of homelessness for the first time, which is where you see, I think, our numbers continuing to go up year over year. But it's why I love working at KHC, because I know that we're doing so many other things besides just in the homeless programs department that are trying to prevent homelessness for everybody. So thank you so much. I'll be happy to answer any questions. And I think the next slide has my email address.
Hey, thank you. That's wonderful work. And just want to tell the whole staff, I appreciate your all's effort in not only studying this issue, but trying to prevent homelessness. So any members have any questions of Shay?
Mr. Chairman, it's Bill again. I apologize. This is all very informative and I'm trying to learn. So that last slide, Shay, that you spoke to, talked about the federal dollars that we administer in the homeless programs. What would does the state provide any assistance in the homeless category, or I assume there's local governments that also contribute to this issue or contribute to to the solution of it, or private dollars. Do you have any?
So I certainly welcome Wendy and Curtis. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Jones. I didn't mean to overspeak.
I was just curious if you had any comments with respect to state, local, or private funding and what that trend might look like in addressing the homeless.
Okay, and I was just saying for Curtis and Wendy to correct me if I misstate anything, but I am fairly confident, actually I am confident that there is no state funding for emergency shelters or any type of homeless response that I can think of. There might be a limited amount, though I think it's a pass-through through the VA for veterans through the Kentucky Department of Veterans Affairs, but it would be a very small amount. There is pass-through money from the feds for victim service providers, which are domestic violence shelters. But in terms of state money, there's nothing specific for homelessness, like, street outreach, shelters, housing specifically for homeless. Local governments, I know Lexington in particular does allocate funding for some operations. I cannot speak to Louisville, but I think they probably do as well. I know some northern Kentucky communities do, the Covington, Boone County, maybe even Campbell, put some funds in. it's not a substantial amount, and I think it's typically around the winter months to subcontract with providers to put people in hotels. But outside of Lexington and Louisville, I'm not familiar with many local governments, and certainly not in the more rural parts where they just probably don't have the funds to do so, that are putting funds in.
And Shay, I say that Louisville does provide some local government funding, but they largely depend on HUD funding for their homeless services as well.
And Bill, the issue did come up because there was proposed legislation in this last state legislative session that would require every county to have a homeless shelter. And, you know, the logistics of making that happen, and then how do you safely staff it and cover the costs, was a real challenge. It didn't go anywhere, but you know, it's just they're very expensive, and it's hard to keep them operating successfully over time.
Thank you. Great presentation. Much appreciated.
Mr. Jones, don't ever be afraid to ask a question. So,
I'm not.
feel free to. Other questions for Shay? Anyone else? Well, Shay, please keep up the good work, and thank you again, once again, to the staff for all the work you all do. So,
Thank you so much.
okay. All right. So, Sam, you want to give us a legislative update?
Sure.
Okay.
So the 2025 regular session of the General Assembly, talking about state legislation at this point, concluded at the end of March. And if you recall, over the summer and last fall, the Kentucky Housing Task Force heard from a number of stakeholders, including KHC staff, regarding the status of housing in Kentucky. And findings from the KHC housing supply gap analysis were included in the task force's final report. With some limited exceptions, the 2025 General Assembly did not adopt significant changes to the legislation surrounding housing in Kentucky. Much of this might be attributed to the fact that this was a non-budget session of the legislature, and many of the policies pursued by other states and recommendations proposed by stakeholders to the task force involve funding for housing. There were, however, which Wendy mentioned, a number of pieces of legislation that were introduced related to housing in the wake of the task force initiative. One notable bill, the Kentucky Housing Opportunity Act, which was HB 583, included a number of efforts designed to increase the supply of housing in Kentucky. Notable provisions include a $100 million affordable housing loan pool fund to provide construction loans for the creation of new single-family and multifamily homes for middle-income Kentuckians. It also proposed a number of other initiatives, including creating a new homelessness prevention fund, creating a state affordable housing tax credit, modifying the way the Kentucky Affordable Housing Trust Fund is funded, and revising a number of other existing housing statutes to incentivize the increase of housing supply. While these housing efforts did not pass this year, it's possible that this bill and others like it introduced this year could form the basis for future action by the legislature in the next session and in future sessions. KHC is hopeful that the General Assembly will take significant action to address the housing supply gap in next year's budget session. On the federal legislative front, Winston, Wendy, and I traveled to Washington, D.C. last month to attend the NCSHA Legislative Conference and to meet with Kentucky congressional delegation and discuss housing matters with a particular focus on the housing supply gap. We provided congressional offices with data from KHC's housing supply gap analysis, as well as the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce's housing report. We generally found the conversations that we had with congressional staff to be helpful, and we hope that it forms the basis for continuing dialogue surrounding the federal government's role in addressing Kentucky's housing needs. One of the key pieces of legislation we discussed with congressional staff was the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, or the AHCIA. This piece of legislation would accomplish a number of improvements to the low-income housing tax credit, including expanding the number of credits Kentucky receives and reducing the number of tax-exempt bonds that are needed for each affordable housing project. This legislation was reintroduced in the House of Representatives earlier this month with overwhelming bipartisan support, including 5 of Kentucky's congressmen signing on as original co-sponsors. The housing community and KHC are hopeful that the provisions in this bill are incorporated into the larger tax legislation Congress is considering this year. And based on what we've heard, we feel that we've got a good chance of that occurring. Also, while we attended the legislative conference last month, we heard from Representative Mike Flood from Nebraska, who is the chair of the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee, which oversees the Home Investment Partnerships Program. Representative Flood asked for comments on how the legislature might improve the home program, and earlier this month, along with Ranking Member Cleaver, issued a formal request for information on how the home and CDBG programs might be improved. We have solicited input from key stakeholders, and we intend to respond to this RFI with proposed statutory and regulatory changes that could make these funds flow more efficiently and be more effective for Kentucky. So that's, in a nutshell, my update on the state and federal legislative efforts. If any of you have any questions, please feel free to let me know.
Thank you, Sam. Any members have any questions of Sam? Thank you, Sam. Thank you all for your efforts, and thank you, and Winston and Wendy, for going to Washington, D.C. and working so hard for us. We appreciate it. So that leads us to the items from the board or staff. Winston, is Winston on?
Yeah, I'm on, Mike. I had it on mute.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I really don't have anything to add. Normally, I introduce the informational items, but the agenda set it up as to where they were self-introducing, and I think that's just fine. And I want to thank Shay and Sam for the good job that they've done. I'm happy to take any questions that from any of the board members that you may have about anything that we've discussed in informational items or otherwise, but I don't have anything independent of what we've covered today, except to say that we realized that we had a fairly short agenda today, and we, by surveying everybody, was able to make this virtual meeting. And the May meeting is very likely, very almost positively, to be in-person meeting. We're dealing with the budget issues for next year, and those things are hard enough to understand in person, let alone to understand virtually. So we look forward to seeing you all in May here in Frankfort.
Thank you, Winston. I want to give you the opportunity here. And also, could I ask you or Wendy or Sam, you're concerned about federal dollars at this point? Are we in pretty good shape? I know Section 8 housing is hurting a little bit.
Well,
can you bring us up to date about that?
Wendy can probably do a better job than I, but let me just say this. In terms of the current flow of funds, we're receiving the funds that were appropriated and that were covered by the continuing resolution. Those numbers are fairly steady, but we do have increased expenses in terms of the money that we get that we turn around and spend for rent payments. Rent's going up, and so we're able to pay for fewer units of rental housing than we have in the past. But by and large, the funds are still flowing, and we're doing fine. We are concerned about what the future budget pretends to have. We hear all sorts of rumors and statements, as I'm sure you all do, as to what programs will be cut. I mean, there's been statements to the effect that the Section 8 program will be abolished and replaced with some sort of state grant program. But none of us know anything in detail about what is likely to happen here. Wendy, do you have, or Sam, have anything to add?
I'll just to add to what Winston has said, we're in a little bit of a holding place right now. The continuing resolution did fund, what we do, but again, with no increases. And so if you all know anything about what's happening with rents, it means we will effectively serve fewer folks. And we have stopped issuing any new housing choice vouchers just in an effort to try to not kick anyone off the program this year. We've also been told that HUD's going to do, they use the word proration on our admin fees for our Section 8 program, what we use to pay our staff. Proration just means they acknowledge they're not going to pay us what it costs to run the program. So they're going to pay us 91 cents of every dollar that it costs us to pay the program, and KHC will have to make up the difference. In terms of other programs, again, I think we're in a holding pattern with the continuing resolution that passed recently. We are concerned, most of what we do relies on partners across the state, right? Homeless services organization, community action agencies are really essential. And so to the extent that other areas get cut or have large layoffs of their federal staff, that creates the risk of things stopping, not because there's not money, but there's not anyone to sign a paper, push a button, approve a process. We're experiencing that a little bit ourselves. Our partners are as well. There's just a whole lot of uncertainty is how I would characterize it right now.
Okay. Thank you, Wendy and Winston. We appreciate all you all do. So any other board members or staff have anything that they would like to bring up at this point?
Well, I want to say there's two great events. One is the KHC annual meeting, so start thinking about that. And the other is June 10th is the Metropolitan Housing Coalition annual meeting with a speaker on zoning. And Wendy, I lived through the what they did with public housing, giving 90 cents of the dollar that they're supposed to give, and I couldn't bake fast enough to make up the difference.
All right. Any other members? If not, I'll entertain a motion that we adjourn.
So moved.
Okay. I have a motion to adjourn. Second, please.
Second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like
Aye.
sign. Motion carries. We're adjourned. Thank you all very much for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank